Today I'll be presenting some really exciting research that has been done over the past few months looking into flash droughts across the United States. So first of all, I'd also like to acknowledge our other co-authors from other universities, Jason Otkin from University of Wisconsin-Madison, also Eric Hunt from the University of Nebraska, as well as Xiaoming Xiao here at OU in the Center of Spatial Analysis. So just real quickly to go over the research group I'm in, we look at several components of the land and the atmosphere, including climate, hydrology, weather, and ecosystems. And so we don't just look at these individual components, but we also try to look at the intersection between them and the relationships and try to look at the big picture and how they're all related. And so if you haven't noticed, these climate, hydrology, ecosystem weather group makes a acronym. We call ourselves the Cheery Research Group. And yes, we do actually have a mascot, but I'm not going to elaborate too much further into that. And also, before I get going, I just want to acknowledge our sponsors, which make this allow this work to be done, the USDA, as well as the NSF, and as well as NOAA. All right, so before getting into flash droughts, I want to talk about briefly the types of droughts there are. And so there's four main types: meteorological, agricultural, hydrological, and socioeconomical and political. Will change depending on the time and duration of the event. And so specifically with flash droughts, we are looking at the meteorological time and duration, but these begin meteorological, but they eventually can lead into agricultural in terms of their effects and their temporal and spatial resolution. And so defining flash droughts, first of all, these are characterized by the rapid onset and development of drought conditions. These can greatly negatively impact vegetation, mostly by depleting root zone soil moisture and increasing moisture stress. This can be really significant on agricultural regions, especially if flash droughts occur in sensitive stages during the growing season and can lead to significant yield loss. I just want to throw up a couple of images here. These are from the Marina site back in 2012. This is in north central Oklahoma, just showing the impact of the vegetation during flash droughts. And so the top panel shows vegetation conditions on 1st of July, and within 30 days, just a month, you can see at the bottom how quickly the vegetation has deteriorated during this flash drought event. So just to provide a little bit of backup in terms of the previous research and why this study was done. There's been a study done by Otkin et al. Who initially looked at something called the evaporative stress index. And for their study, they specifically looked at the evaporative stress index as derived from satellite-based thermal infrared observations. But they looked at ESI and they compared it to the drought monitor and SPI, other precipitation-based indicators, and they found that the ESI change, specifically the ESI change in anomalies, can provide an early warning for drought. And a couple of case studies were also done by them as well in another paper, also once again looking at rapid ESI changes and the relationship to drought development. It's also been another paper out by Moe and Lettmeyer, and they took a look at the temporal trend of heat wave flash droughts. And so for their paper, they looked at flash droughts by identifying pentas that treat certain criteria, specifically looking at air temperature, evapotranspiration, soil moisture. And they found that there was a decreasing trend in these heat wave flash droughts. More recently, a paper that has been recently accepted into the Bulletin American Meteorological Society was a review on flash droughts by Otkin et al. And they try to pinpoint a consistent definition for flash droughts. They overview some of the specifically two different types of how to identify them, specifically either through rapid intensification or by duration. And so their argument is that since droughts have impact, or sorry, the longevity and impact are fundamental for droughts. Therefore, when defining a flash drought, it should have also be long enough to impact, be long enough in terms of deriving the definition for a flash drought. So taking that and going forward is what led into the methodology for our research. And so to do this study, we looked at the North American reanalysis data set and specifically looked over the United States. And so we looked between the years 1979 and 2016, specifically in the growing season between April and October. And so to identify flash droughts, we identified them using pentads from daily data. So we essentially took daily data of ESI and averaged them to make pentads. 5 days. And then, so before getting into kind of the large flash drought algorithm, there's 2 criteria I wanted to focus on and talk about briefly. And the first one was the length of flash drought, going back into that longevity and the impact of a flash drought. We defined here that the flash drought need to be at least 5 total pentads long, or 4 changes total. This comes out to 25 days. And so the major reason for implementing this criteria was to separate flash droughts from dry spells. We want to stay away from dry spells and get into flash droughts that have some kind of impact on the environment. And so automatically, we didn't want to look at just a single pentad or 2 pentads or 15 days, 3 pentads, or even 4, which is only 3 changes, but we want at least 5 total pentad to define a flash drought. And the second characteristic being we want to define, obviously, a drought component of the flash drought. And so using ESI, the final value of the ESI in a flash drought had to be below the 21st percentile with respect to a grid point and time of year. And then so next gets into the flash component, the rapid intensification into drought conditions, and defining that with ESI. So now I'll discuss a little bit about ESI. ESI is defined as the evapotranspiration divided by the potential evapotranspiration. So physically, what this means, as the ESI value decreases, this means the evaporative stress increases. It's opposite in terms of the value versus what it means. But so likewise, as ESI increases, this means that the evaporative stress is decreasing. And this will make sense in just a second when I show a few figures. But in terms of the physicality of what ESI is, essentially as ESI approaches 1, this indicates that the atmospheric demand of evapotranspiration is met. And then on the other side, if ESI is approaching 0, that means that now the atmosphere is meeting the demand for evapotranspiration. So just to provide a visualization of what this looks like, here on the 2 panels, I have time series schematics of ESI. And so the top panel shows an example of decreasing ESI, or this would be an increase of evaporative stress. And so speaking from the most general standpoint, generally as ESI decreases, this is indicating drier and warmer conditions. And as I mentioned before, since ESI is a function of ET and over the ratio of PET, if ESI can go down if we have drier conditions, hence through lower ET values, which could be through drier soil moistures, for example, or it could also decrease with increasing PET, which, for example, could be driven by higher surface winds, warmer temperatures, and so on. So this is just from the most general standpoint, you have drier and warmer conditions, or a combination of both when ESI is decreasing. And then likewise on the opposite side, if ESI is increasing, you're generally leading to wetter and cooler conditions. So just want to briefly talk about, I don't want to go too much into this. This is a little bit in terms of the processing for ESI in order to prepare it for the flash drought algorithm that we used. And so ultimately we use ESI, gathering that from daily ET and PET, and we normalize these values. And the reason why we want to normalize them for flash drought analysis was to provide inter-region, inter-annual, and intra-seasonal comparison of flash droughts. And so we want to be able to look at a certain grid point and compare it to another grid point. We also want to compare it at a grid point from year to year and also within this. And so mathematically, we did this by comparing z-scores, and previously on the previous slide that provide a lot more details on that. But this is the most general description of that. And so just providing a few figures here. This is just, for example, the mean annual ESI, and you can see across the United States, it's different with much lower ESI values, for example, in the Southwest, Mojave Desert, and then moving across the Great Plains into the Midwest, you have higher ESI values. Likewise, from a year-to-year basis, you have different variability of ESI, interannual variability of ESI across the United States, and similarly, even within season, you have different variabilities of ESI across the United States. So essentially, the entire goal of this, in terms of processing this to normalize it, was to make flash droughts comparable between grid point to grid point, any region, between years, and also within season as part of this analysis. All right, so we'll get into some of the results. First of all, discussing flash droughts that we've partitioned into uninterrupted and interrupted flash droughts. And then we'll break up the flash droughts by their intensity, how rapidly they intensify towards drought conditions. And then I'll show some early results on pre-existing conditions before flash drought events, and then end with some early results on flash drought aftershocks, which I have to give the credit for Jeff for that term, and we'll provide more info on that later. All right, so first of all, in terms of the interrupted and uninterrupted flash droughts, we partitioned them into two types. First one defined as, also we could call them a pure flash drought. This is a rapid monotonic increase of evaporative stress. And the other type being a rapid increase of evaporative stress, but having brief recessions in between. And so putting together a frequency of this, this middle panel here shows the pure or uninterrupted flash droughts, and the bottom panel here shows the interrupted flash droughts. And so first of all, the biggest takeaway is most flash droughts in general are interrupted to some extent. They do have some brief recessions. It's very rare to actually have a flash drought where you just have continuous monotonic increase of evaporative stress, but they do exist. But the biggest result here, as you can see in the top panel, summing these two types together into the total flash droughts, was that there exists a regional hotspot of flash droughts across the Great Plains, Southern Great Plains and Northern Great Plains, as well as the Midwest. There's also some other local hotspot regions found with the results here. We can see in the Mississippi embayment area, which is on the border between eastern Arkansas and northwestern Mississippi, there's a hotspot, as well as down on the southeastern United States along Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. We also see where there's regions where you don't necessarily get many flash droughts as expected, for example, like in the desert region, Southwest, or the Mojave Desert. So I just want to provide a schematic, actually an example taken from a specific grid point for a specific year for a season, and kind of show the example of the uninterrupted flash drought example versus an interrupted flash drought. So here is the time series from April to October of ESI values in central Nebraska during 1988. And so when identifying a flash drought here, this gives the example of a monotonic decrease of ESI. And so here the flash drought would be detected here, given starting in central May and ending in the earlier portions of June. And you can see here that ESI never increases, it is continually decreasing. And then give an example of an interrupted flash drought. This one will be taken from 2012 in central Oklahoma. And so we can see this one also starting in early portions of June and ending in early July. We see that this one actually does have a pentad change where there was a brief recession ESI where it did go up, but overall the overall trend still decreased towards the end. So that's just an example of what was being collected during, for all the grid points over all the years. Okay, so next thing we did was break up these flash droughts into intensity. So by doing this, what we did was we essentially took the mean ESI change during the flash drought and categorized them. And so we want to keep it somewhat comparable to the flash drought, just to keep it somewhat familiar for now. So we order these from FD0 to FD4. FD0 in this case would be the weakest flash droughts that have the slowest intensification, and then FD4 would be exceptional flash droughts with the most rapid intensification. And here are the results for that. And so starting off with the top left panel, that's the weakest flash droughts. We can see overall that there's no preferential region. Generally, weak flash droughts can occur anywhere in the United States except, once again, kind of in the Southwest, desert Southwest. But as we move up in the intensity of the flash droughts, moving into FD1, moderate, and also FD2, severe flash drought, we see a signal appear. And this signal appears over the Great Plains and also a little bit into the Midwest as well. There's also some of those, also in some of those local hotspots like the Mississippi embayment and the Southeast United States, like I mentioned before. So we see that the moderate and severe and some of the extreme flash droughts occur in the Great Plains, but the most exceptional flash droughts, shown in the very bottom panel, bottom right panel, show that the most exceptional flash droughts actually occur in the Midwest region of the United States, and a little bit also in the Great Plains, but actually mostly in the Midwest region. So here, I just want to show also some early results for pre-existing ESI conditions. We took a look at pre-existing ESI before flash drought events, and we just categorized them by above normal, below normal, and normal ESI conditions. And We did this by taking the mean ESI approximately 2 months before any individual flash drought event, and then we found the percent of them broken up by these categories. And so there's two main results that I want to talk about here. The first one was kind of starting, I guess, in the bottom panel with the preceding above normal ESI. What we see here is suggesting that when you have evaporative stress that is very low, in this case the ESI value is high, you can actually still get flash droughts occurring through the Great Plains and through the Midwest. So you can be in wet conditions, very wet soil moisture, for example, and that doesn't prevent a flash drought from occurring. You can still have that occur. But on the other end, if you look up on the top panel with preceding below normal ESI, there's kind of a regional hotspot in the southeast United States. And so one way to look at or think about this would be that for the southeast, you almost need a jump start or a kick start to get into a flash drought. You need below normal evaporative stress conditions in order to tip it off into a flash drought, just making the conditions even worse. But these were just some of the early results here. We plan to break these up probably by region and take a deeper look at what's going on here and how this ESI is distributed for flash droughts depending on different regions. And so this is Jeff's favorite slide because we have discovered a new thing associated with flash droughts. And so the idea is this, that if you have an initial flash drought in a given year, it's possible to have one or more flash droughts following that initial flash drought. And so just outlining kind of an example of this, let's say you have an initial flash drought, but then you have some sort of recession. This can be due to precipitation, and that as well as in combination with cooler temperatures and slower wind speeds, etc. But then what happens is, since you had the initial flash drought in the beginning of the growing season, your environment is susceptible to rapid increases in evaporative stress, and this is due to the depletion of root zone soil moisture early in the growing season when you had the initial flash drought. So what this ultimately leads into is a flash drought aftershock. And so we just kind of did a raw count of these. And so on the top panel just shows the total aftershocks across the United States. We see there's obviously more across the Great Plains and the Midwest. We also did on the bottom graph showed the percent chance of an aftershock occurring in any given flash drought year. And so it's pretty homogeneous across the United States generally. But here we plan to maybe do a count of aftershocks per flash drought year to see if maybe there are different regions that experience more aftershocks in a given flash drought compared to other regions. But I also want to give an example schematic or actual case of this to kind of show what's going on with these aftershocks. So this top panel here will show an example from 2011 in central Kansas. And so right here on the left side of the panel is the initial flash drought as picked up by the flash drought algorithm. And so continuing forward, we see that there was actually, at least picked up through the flash drought algorithm, there was 2 more aftershocks that occurred in the latter portions of the growing season. And so also giving just a quick second example here, in 2005, northwestern Mississippi, initial flash drought capture at the beginning of the growing season. And we also saw 2 initial aftershocks here. So one of the things here is, this is very new. This was just simply using the current criteria we had to capture flash droughts. But going forward, what we'll probably do is take a look at aftershocks on shorter pentad scales, because you can see one example is on the top panel. Right after the initial flash drought, you see a decrease starting about halfway through May, a little bit halfway through May, where you have 4 pentads in a row there that rapidly decrease back to the initial ESI that was at the end of the initial flash drought. And so and obviously this goes back into talking about root zone soil moisture. If that's already depleted, even if you have a recession in the ESI, it'll drastically go back there if you don't have continuous precipitation, for example, or cooler temperatures to help moderate that. So we'll have to take a deeper look into this and probably find a way different to categorize these. But these are just some of the initial results in terms of flash drought aftershocks. So the biggest takeaway points from the research so far is that a hotspot for flash droughts exists across the Great Plains and the Midwest, as well as some more local regions, as mentioned, Mississippi embayment and Southeast United States. These intense flash droughts can occur mostly in the Great Plains, but we see the most intense flash droughts occurring over the Midwest. And then lastly, something we just stumbled upon, these occurrence of flash drought aftershocks occurring after an initial flash drought in a given season. So as far as future work goes, there is a lot that could branch off of this, but some of the things that we may stay more focused on is looking maybe at regional trends of flash drought frequencies, breaking up into central United States, southeast, northeast, western, and seeing how flash drought frequency changes with time. Something else we might want to take a look at is a supercomposite of these flash droughts. So that would be essentially taking the mean of all the flash droughts, specifically with certain, for example, a certain pentide length, and identifying the shape of those to maybe help in terms of predicting. Maybe different regions have different shapes of the flash drought. Maybe they rapidly develop. Maybe they're more slower with time, for example. That's just one thing we could look at. Another thing is breaking them up, partitioning the flash droughts into beginning and ending months and looking at temporal hotspots for flash droughts. Then lastly, another thing we could take a look at is a case study, for example, looking at the spatial evolution of a flash drought event. And all this will lead into some primary goal here. We've been looking at the United States, for example, in these results, but ultimately we would like to transition from local to global, and this meaning going from regional to the global scale. And we would like to eventually identify global hotspots for flash droughts using this criteria, using, for example, the MER2 data set or other global reanalysis data sets. And if you have any questions, we have our contact info on there, and thank you very much.
All right. We have the Zoom chat open. If anybody has any questions you'd like to ask Jordan at this point. I'm giving it a minute. While I'm giving it a minute, because I'm not a meteorologist, I want to know, like, what do you know in terms of, like, what should I know in terms of what happens before the flash? Like, what sorts of things lead into this other than just like a lack of precipitation? Is there any like particular like large scale weather anomalies that tend to occur around them?
Well, certainly just a lack of rainfall during the growing season will help sort of get one of these moving. Most droughts begin with a lack of rainfall, so flash droughts are no real different in that regard. So certainly a lack of rainfall, but also periods of enhanced clear sky conditions, elevated temperatures, and maybe a little bit drier in the atmosphere, not just drier because of precipitation, but what we call the vapor pressure deficit. I mean, the difference between the temperature and the dew point temperature, or when that starts to increase, that vapor pressure deficit, that can lead to more water loss from the surface to the atmosphere, and then begin to increase the overall evaporative stress. So there's a couple of different factors that probably play a very important role. Some are in the atmosphere. Hot, clear sky conditions will help to sort of force the environment towards flash drought, and this takes place on the orders of days to weeks, of course. And then, obviously a precipitation deficit. Another aspect of this is the vegetation itself and the soil moisture conditions. If the vegetation is really, really active, it's going to pull water out of the soil pretty quickly. And so it'll increase the overall evaporative demand in that respect. The other is if the soil moisture is not, becomes dry rather quickly, that will also begin to increase the overall evaporative demand. So there's factors in the atmosphere and there's factors in the land surface that also play an important role. And isolating all of those is really is a major challenge, but something that future work will address.
Excellent. There is a note here. I don't know if you two are looking at the chat box at this point. I've got a suggestion that you brief the folks at the National Drought Mitigation Center on this work if you haven't already.
Yeah, so we we are closely tied to the University of Nebraska through Eric Hunt, but also Mark Svoboda at the Drought Mitigation Center. And so, yeah, it's kind of an ongoing partnership. In fact, the current article that's was just accepted involved not only myself and Jason Otkin from the University of Wisconsin and Eric Hunt from Nebraska, but also Mark Svoboda from the Drought Mitigation Center. So these are types of things that will hopefully go from research activities here, say at the University of Oklahoma or in the research community. It will go into operations at some point. So there's a direct line through them at this particular point in time. Okay, thanks, David, for that note. And then in terms of, there's a question, since I work in the Northeast, I find the signals there, small spatial scale, that they are interesting. And I think that was also one of the takeaways, is that these kind of events can happen just about anywhere in the US and in North America. There are certainly hot spots, but that doesn't mean that we won't see these types of features happen in other locations as well. In fact, I think we were a little surprised to find hot spots, say, in the southeast portion of the US and in other areas beyond the Great Plains and the Midwest. Those aren't areas that we typically necessarily associate with flash drought. So that's one of the reasons why at some point we'll probably have to, even though we want to take this maybe local to global, we'll also have to dig into some of these details on a more regional scale to understand the different dynamics, because maybe we see different forcing for these events in different areas, and it may be different from region to region.